All right, everybody, welcome to our another live cast here on the Game Wisdom channel. Of course, I am Josh Bycer, and we got a very interesting cast discussion for you this episode. We're going to be discussing the growing topic about diversity when it comes to the game industry. After recent incidents and news pieces such as Riot Games, Arena.net, and of course growing concerns and discussions regarding the Me Too movement, it has certainly been a major factor when it comes to the game industry, and it continues to be so. And joining me tonight is my my returning guest, game economist Ramin Shogazad.
Hi Josh, how are you doing?
I am doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm pretty excited about this talk.
Yep. It's definitely an interesting one. Let me just make sure.
I know I'm supposed to dread this topic, but I'm pretty excited about it.
And it's definitely one that has gotten a lot of people interested in either discussing or not really saying much. Let me just make sure. Oh no, Drang, I think that was just Ramina sitting still for 2 minutes, hopefully. They weren't sure if you were live or if you were recorded from the window there.
I'm just petrified. Were the leaves moving at least?
Yes, at least that's proof that it's an actual live image right now. But for people who are new joining us, we've spoken to Ramin several times in the past about free-to-play design, monetization, and we'll probably have more discussions about that in the future. But when it comes to diversity in the game industry or just generally in the workplace, this is a topic that, of course, can bring out all manner of comments. And for anyone new watching us, either live or recorded, I would like to at least please say to keep the comments and stuff civil. But since certainly you've had more experience than me when it comes to studying studios and working in the game industry itself, I'm going to turn things over to you, Ramin, to get us started when it comes to discussing about the growing issue and importance of diversity in the workplace, and especially in the game industry.
Well, with your permission, I'd like to start this conversation about 250 or 300,000 years ago. Because really, racism isn't just a cultural issue. It's our country was founded on racism and continues to be struggling daily with this issue, and it's not just because of bad habits or bad teachings, but there are fundamental biological issues here that have existed for the entirety of the existence of our species. And to really understand what's going on here, you have to get down to some subcellular stuff in order to then go back to where we're at now to understand what's really going on and why this is such a difficult subject. We're not going to effectively tackle this unless we understand the physiology involved. And there is physiology involved, which I almost never hear people talking about because the research is fairly new, and we're still very much discrimination is widespread, and we just make it about so many other issues, but we're not really understanding why we discriminate and how fundamental that is to humans. So 250, 300,000 years ago, we all lived in tribes, and we all had the same hormones we have now. And one very important hormone is one that research has just been really looking into in the last decade, and that's called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that you will release during positive social interactions with people you are close to. And it's a hormone that helps boost trust, vulnerability, willingness to share, all this good stuff. We often call it the love hormone or the moral hormone. And the literature talks very much about how all the positive effects of this hormone, and this hormone is such that it's so powerful. You can on a big dose of it, you can get in such a powerful altered state of consciousness that you can be willing to put your body between the body of your child and that of an attacking tiger to defend your child, even if that's a suicidal action. Under the effects of this hormone, you're totally able to do that. And so you could see how that could be a survival trait for our species, because as we come together to defend ourselves against greater threats that individually we would have no chance against, collectively we can defend ourselves against these threats. And that's why this hormone is such a powerful element in our physiology. At the same time, the hormone has a reverse effect on those that we see as not being part of our tribe. So, for instance, the tiger, assume if it was attacking, would not be considered part of our tribe. It would be considered a threat, an outsider, what I call xeno. And so when you release oxytocin in the presence of xeno, instead of it creating love or vulnerability, this actually triggers aggression, especially in men, who can get very aggressive under oxytocin. And this can there are gender differences, and so this is has the dual effect of not only helping you protect your kin, your tribe, but also fighting off any potential threats. Now, same hormone, both situations, totally different result. The different result is dependent on whether you see the person as being part of your tribe or not. And the idea of tribe is one that transcends race. You might be friendly towards somebody who's of a different race of yours, but that you've known for many years, and then but been to being very aggressive to somebody who is of the same race as you, but who's a complete stranger, or homeless, or the wrong political party, or the wrong religion, or any number of reasons that would allow you to decide that they are not the same tribe as you. So when we get into discussions of inclusion and diversity, what we're really grappling with here is how we define tribes. And there are innumerable industries, religions, groups, governments. There's so many agencies or entities are involved in trying to daily define what our tribe is, or at least what your tribe should be, because it's known that if you identify this other person or this other organization as part of your tribe, you're much more likely to be friendly and giving and tolerant to that group than if you see them as being outside of your tribe. So a tremendous amount of marketing, advertising, politics, religious doctrine goes into making sure that you see whatever group is promoting it as part of your tribe. So you'll be friendly towards it. You'll be generous towards it. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans would be out of work if there was no racism, because this is what they do for a job, is defining what your tribe is. So when it comes to a game studio, the first thing that a game studio will do when it attempts to identify a new recruit is to go through the technical qualifications. Do you have the proper experience? Do you have the skill sets? Did you go to school for the right thing? If you have all these basic things, or if you've published games in your current role or the role they're trying to fill, yada yada yada. Once they get past all these technical qualifications, the next thing that as far as I'm concerned, every major studio will do, and probably most medium studios will do also, is they will apply the cultural fit test. And the cultural fit test is a studio's attempt to see if you will fit in with their existing people. Now, a cultural fit test is really a tribe test. Are you of the same tribe as the people you already have in the studio? If so, you can fit right in, no problem. There's no chance that there'll be aggression triggered because you're identified as xeno. But if you're seen as non-tribe, and I've been in interviews where they will ask me only a very limited number of technical questions, but an enormous number of tribal questions. Tribal questions are questions that they try to use to see either directly or indirectly determine what's your politics, what's your religion, who your friends are, so they can see maybe what type of tribes you're attached to. I went to a studio where in Texas once where we started asking me a lot of these tribal questions, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a bad situation. So I thought, well, let's just get to the chase, And they were like, they asked me what do I do for on my free time. So I said, well, okay, I I engage in LGBTQ activism, and I have a genderqueer partner. And I just threw that right out there, just to see what the reaction would be. And it was amazing. They must have set a world record for how fast they had stuffed me into a taxi heading to the airport. But I mean, but that's what I wanted, because it saved them time and it saved me time. What was the point of even going through this whole song and dance when really all they wanted to do was determine if I was part of their tribe? Now, why is that a bad thing? I mean, isn't it a good idea to have a tribe where everybody gets along because they have the same views? Well, the big problem with that, let me know if you have any questions, because I'm going on and on here. But if you have any questions, just get in.
Sure.
Google's already recently done research that took them 6 or 7 years to determine what groups are the most productive. They want to answer this fundamental question: what leads to a group that's productive? And they found that not only was a group most productive when it was diverse in backgrounds and opinions, but also when the amount of speaking done by every member of the group was relatively equal. They found that a group led by an expert, or somebody who was treated as the expert, who did most of the talking, had the lowest performance. So this unequal power distribution in a team led to the lowest output, even if the team was led by an expert, especially if the team was led by an expert, assuming the expert was trying to act like the leader and dominating the conversation. You hear a lot of anecdotal and scientific information showing that men tend to dominate conversations when in a mixed group. So it's typical that women won't get to speak as much as they should. And you can just see in media that women tend to be treated much more critically when they try to write articles, say, in media. Or if there's been a lot of debate about how game developers that are women that'll go on to social media and they'll interact with the public, and they might make a mistake, how they'll almost always be fired when they make a mistake, whereas a man may be censured but not fired. So the reaction to a mistake might be different also if they do saying something. This can be created because, especially when you have teams that are mostly male, or if they're mostly white, or if they're very strongly one type of group with very little variance in one characteristic, they'll see that as their tribe.
Yep.
And then they'll see anything that's not having that characteristic as xeno. And so there's an opportunity for aggression there. In the very least, you're going to see a dominance where you don't have the sharing that Google is trying to get at.
Yep, and let me switch things back over here. Yeah, and I think when it comes to the video game industry, especially what you were saying earlier, Ramin, about how much is put into this focus on the tribe or that group culture, I mean, that's pretty much how the video game industry really took off for a lot of people. That most people were viewed as being, outside normal social circles, the quote-unquote geek or nerd of the 80s and 90s. So everyone kind of banded together that way, and it became for a lot of people like a badge of honor. But as you said, what ends up happening is that it's a famous saying, beware when fighting monsters lest you become one, that the group itself has kind of become the gatekeepers in a matter of speaking.
Well, game development's gone mainstream. We make games for every race, all genders, even people without genders. We make the games we make are often distributed to multiple nations, multiple continents. So the idea that we could make games that are much more inclusive has real commercial value, because the more inclusive, the more friendly your game is to a diverse market population, the more money you potentially can be making from your products. That's difficult to do if you have just a very narrow band of who you're allow into the tribe in a studio. And even if you might have like a 50-50 split between men and women, or you have a variety of races, what I've noticed is, even if you have that, as soon as I get into design teams, it's almost impossible to find a design team that isn't all male and white.
And like as you were saying regarding trying to grow the market out, it's one of those very interesting things we've been seeing. And this is a question I have for you, Ramin, that I'm not sure. This could either be a very long or short answer, but we'll see what happens. It's the idea that if whenever we hear, and there are probably dozens upon, or at this point, hundreds of videos on YouTube, whenever there's a discussion about diversity or women in the game industry or comics or etc., of people, fighting against it. And one of the most common criticisms that seems to pop up is the idea of quote-unquote forced diversity. When they view that if you have a female character in a video game, or you hire a woman who's a lead, that you are just trying to force diversity, or you're trying to check it off on a list to say, oh, we're so progressive and stuff like that. When you hear that criticism, what runs through your mind about it?
Well, first of all, when you try to populate your advertisement from a very white company with a few token minorities to make it look like you care, that's contrived. I think a lot of consumers can see that is contrived. That's not really representing the culture of your company. But I think that this focus on binary characteristics or very narrow characteristics like race or gender or things like this avoids the bigger topic, which is this isn't a racial issue, this isn't a gender issue, this is a tribal issue. And understanding how we view tribes is the most key thing here. And the way to eliminate this type of discrimination is to hire people who have what I call a large tribe worldview. A large tribe worldview is a view of the world that means that everyone is part of your tribe, or almost everyone is part of your tribe. Very few exclusions. So a person with a large tribe worldview could walk down the street, meet a complete stranger, and treat them as if they were family. That's a very radical proposition for most people. But as soon as you do that, now the positive effects of oxytocin apply to everyone you meet, and aggression almost entirely disappears, especially if you can go beyond just the human species with the size of your tribe. If you can do that, fighting stops, aggression stops, all types of activities that cause us to not trust people stop, because everyone's giving instead of taking, or helping instead of threatening.
Now, I just have a quick question for you. With regards to that, to me, that sounds like someone who is very much an extrovert, and I wanted to ask you about that. For a lot of people, including myself, I would consider myself introverted, and for a lot of people like that, they tend to struggle in social situations along those lines. Can that group worldview, can that be applied to someone who is very much an introvert?
Just because I go in front of groups of maybe hundreds of thousands of people and start talking doesn't make me an extrovert. I'm very much an introvert. I can sit in front of a computer and not see human for a couple of days, and I'm completely okay with that. In fact, if I get in a large group where I get a lot of stimulation, I need that time to get away and recharge. But that doesn't stop me from stopping every time I see a homeless person, talking to them, seeing what they're up to. Not every time, but a lot of them do. And sometimes they have amazing stories. Sometimes they're pretty cool people. Just an example, one group that generally are considered untouchable that people don't talk to, and that doesn't stress my introversion to stop and talk to somebody. They're usually not loud. So I don't really think it's an issue so much of introversion versus extroversion. I think it's just a matter of how you view people. As soon as you change your opinion as to whether somebody's in your tribe or not, the way you chemically react to them instantaneously changes. And then the chemical part of it, you don't have any other control over, because your body is wired that way, and we've been wired that way for 300,000 years. There hasn't been time for evolution to change that, with the exception of maybe a few exotic, sociopaths or such that have like very abnormal chemical responses to oxytocin. Everybody is wired the same here. So it's not, once you shift to a larger tribal view, all these problems just disappear. But the problem is in industry, in these studios, once we move to the cultural test, we're not, the cultural test is not an inclusion test. The cultural test is an exclusion test. The cultural test, which every major game development studio does this, especially if HR is involved, because this is what HR does. They'll go in and they'll do this exclusion test to make sure you're not going to disrupt the culture and the environment in the studio. And so they'll want to eliminate as many differences as possible from a candidate. And one of the ways they can do this is go into the studio and just say, well, what are the characteristics that all these people have in common? Okay, write those down. And then ask questions related to those to the new candidate. Well, do they have the same type of characteristics? Great, bring them in. But see, then you're creating a homogenous population. That's not a diverse population. I don't get asked questions like, when was the last time you went to a rally to defend the rights of minorities? Never been asked this in a question. When I volunteered it, I got a quick ride to the airport. But that's because, again, HR is not trying to include people. They're trying to exclude people. That's their job. And I think it's especially true in game development, because there are so many more people that want to get into game development than there are actual jobs in game development. That there's this fortress mentality has been building up for more than 10 years, where a lot of work has gone into excluding people because you have to. The masses would just assault your fortress if you didn't. You have to build taller walls all the time to keep these people out. Anyways, did you have comments about this?
Yeah, actually I have it too. Like, talking about those kinds of exclusion tests, I remember I went for like a small job like about 2 years ago, and the person started asking me all these questions about like Marvel versus DC, which one were you a part of? And as a matter of fact,
which tribe?
Yeah, and I think I said that I didn't like one of the DC movies, and like the guy was like, "Why? Why don't you like it?" I'm like, I don't know, I don't really care. Or I think it was either Marvel versus DC or Star Wars versus Star Trek. It was one of those. So it was like, I don't really have thoughts on either one. He just like looked at me like, well, why don't you have thoughts on that? Like, I don't know. It just got like very awkward there. But excuse me. But when it comes to that kind of hiring practice, as you said, hiring from the tribe, that's a very good segue into the very recent discussion regarding Riot Games, and kind of the reports regarding sexism and discrimination in not only in their hiring practices, but again, that kind of culture that they've built up. And I'm sure you've probably heard about it, and for people watching or listening to us right now, just to quickly summarize some of the things that have been reported, and I remember hearing about this back in 2010, 2011 when I first tried to apply for them, that they basically hire almost exclusively from either their existing fan base or from people who have played extensively in terms of League of Legends. And for a lot of their job postings, they will literally have on there what your LO ranking should be in order to apply for this job. And some people will argue saying that they, again, want to hire from the tribe. They want to keep this culture stable. They want to keep it growing. But I'm sure when I ask you this question, like, I'm sure you probably have some problems with that kind of hiring practice.
Well, I mean, last time I applied to Riot Games was, I don't know, maybe 2011 or something like that. They've contacted me several times since then, but the last time I actually applied to them was 2011, I think. And I told them that if you need me to help you make a new game, I'm your guy. But if you're not planning on making a new game anytime soon, then please skip over me and hire somebody else, because I didn't see. I saw a lot of places where LOL could be improved and where they could take that, but I wasn't interested in just caretaking an existing product like that. So yeah, they did exactly that. They passed me over. They saved everybody a lot of time. I'm pretty good at excluding people, but it's not based on their views. It's based on what they're trying to do commercially. To make sure that that's what it should be. Am I a good fit for the team? Because am I bringing skills sets that the team needs for what they're attempting to do? If the answer is yes, then we should talk about it. If not, then why are we talking other than just to socialize? I'm happy to socialize, but that's not a like a business hiring kind of situation.
Now, taking this back to the topic regarding diversity, obviously one thing that if we don't mention will probably be yelled at us from the comments is, of course, what happened regarding Gamergate over the last few years, and arguably what could still being felt today. And it certainly, again, has brought a lot of these discussions to the forefront, sometimes passively by people making more articles, and sometimes very aggressively with the number, and I do mean number, of videos and vitriolic attacks we've seen over these last few years. And I'm not sure if there really is a question here, or at least that I can think of, but like, when it comes to this, like, do you see this as more of like things coming to a head, or like what is going on, like when it comes to this whole gamer, quote unquote gamers versus everybody else?
Any time a team is under attack, whether that team is women, African Americans, autistic people, whatever. Anytime a team is under attack, if they come together to defend themselves, that's probably going to fail, especially if it's a minority group, which it almost always will be here. The only way to solve those type of situations are for the attacking team to mitigate the action itself. In other words, if you have a bunch of young white heteronormative men attacking women, game developers, for instance, in this case, then those men need to be the ones to step up to say to the other men, no, this is not the way we're going to do this. No, you are not speaking for the team. You are an outsider. You are a rogue. That type of thing. If the men don't say anything, they're complicit. They're backing it up. And so they're forcing the women to come together to defend themselves, and that just causes a polarization. And as soon as you get the polarization, the oxytocin starts flowing, and aggression can get very high.
And then it becomes again that us versus them mentality.
It can get violent. Because that is how we're wired, unfortunately. It was a great thing when we had to defend ourselves against tigers. But after 200, 300,000 years, society has changed, and the types of threats we deal with are not the same thing. And that intensity of physiological reaction is no longer appropriate. But unfortunately, our bodies, our evolution, won't get the memo for another 5 million years or something. By then, we probably won't be here. So we need to educate ourselves to understand the limitations of our physiology and the limitations of how we view the world. Because, as I've talked to, I think maybe even with you before, we humans can't perceive reality. Humans, our brains are several pounds of meat floating in water, and it's dark in there. There's no light. There's no sound. There's just nerve impulses. Everything we think we are perceiving is just interpreted, oftentimes incorrectly. So we need to understand the limitations of physiology. We need to understand the limitations of our perception. We need to understand the limitations of how we've been programmed in order to act differently and know when it's time to step up and which side to step up onto. So if you're a guy and you're not under attack, and but you see a woman under attack, that your programming tells you to just quiet. But that's not what we need on teams, not on successful teams. We need those people to step up and say, no, don't attack this minority group. We need this minority group. This minority group is valuable to us. This inclusion is important to us. This diversity is important to us. This person has skills that you don't. That's why they're here. So we can't be just singling people out and placing them under stress until we return to a culturally homogenous team, which is going to be the lowest performing team. And our industry is becoming so competitive that we can't afford that type of luxury anymore. We can't afford the luxury of low performing homogenous teams. We need that diversity.
Yeah. And with regards to bringing on skills that are unique or aren't skills that are different from yourself, that takes me to another question or another criticism that I hear a lot when people make like videos or articles trying to denounce, or I guess try again to keep the tribe stable. And that is that when it comes to like programming or STEM work, that women in terms of their brains are wired differently when it comes to programming and stuff like that, and they're not really like interested in those kinds of fields because of that. And to me, that just sounds like a bunch of crap, as Drakon and Chad, I think, has agreed with me on that one. But with the studies you've done, what are your thoughts when those arguments seem to rear their head?
I went to nursing school. I was the only man in my class. I was also the youngest student in my class. I had so many women trying to hit on me, and I wasn't interested. I didn't want to. I was just there to go to school, and they would get mad at me, and it got to the point where I ended up being forced out of the school because I wouldn't sleep with a number of women. I was subjected to sexual harassment by 6 of my peers and 2 of my teachers. I filed a civil rights complaint against Santa Monica College back in that would have been 1985. This is not something that just men do to women, this is something that occurs anytime there's a power differential. Yep. This isn't a gender issue. And I'm not trying to make it a gender issue. This is a power issue. When there's a lot of people that are all one type, doesn't matter what type they are. If they have polka dots, it doesn't matter what they are. If they all have polka dots, and one person shows up that doesn't have polka dots, there's a power differential because the people with polka dots have the power, and the person without the polka dots doesn't have the power. Anytime you have a power differential, the person without the power or the individuals without power are going to be extremely vulnerable. Unless you have this large tribe worldview where people without polka dots are okay, or people with polka dots are okay.
Yeah, and it reminds me, when I was in college, I had a class where I was the only... Actually, I think I took 2 classes where I was the only man in the class. One was an art class. I think one was it was either a gender studies or a women's studies class. And unfortunately, I know for a lot of men probably listening, thinking that it would be some amazing thing. But again, when you have that power imbalance, it can be threatening, whether it's a man to a woman or a woman to a man.
Well, let's just take Tinder, for example. There are so many more men looking for people than women on Tinder that when a new woman shows up at Tinder, they just get dogpiled. It's merciless, and it's very discouraging. Well, you can imagine if you're in a classroom where there's just 1 or 2 women and the rest are all guys. It's the same type of thing. I mean, even if the guys are trying to be civil, they're still going to get piled, even if it's just verbally, because they just stand out. And there's a lot of guys who probably don't have may not necessarily have the best social skills or the most social experience, and they're just seeing the people in their immediate proximity as being people that they should probably be hitting on. Just that effect alone has to make it very difficult for women who are trying to move into STEM positions, which are taught by men, populated mostly by men. It also means that the few that do make it through are probably really exceptional and probably had to work way harder than the men did. So if I do see a female game developer that somehow manages to make it in the design room, she's probably phenomenal.
Yep, and
and has balls of steel.
Yeah. But talking about when you have that minority show up in a room again with that culture, like we see that especially when it comes to online games. The whole, when a lot of women don't feel comfortable turning on their mic when they're playing a game because they know they're going to be treated differently the second a man hears their voice, whether it's, oh, we should date, we should hang out, what's your number, or, you stupid, you're just a dumb woman, how dare you do this, you're probably worse than everybody else on the team.
Yep, I get this immediately. People are, I always use a gender neutral or a female name online, and people are so desperate, determined to nail down what's my real gender, and because it's really important to them, because they need to know which team I'm on. If you're in a room where everyone's male, they can say whatever they want. But as soon as you put a woman in there, now they can't say whatever they want. So this is important because what they say is going to be determined by who's listening.
Yep. And if you say something that is considered offensive and you're among your like-minded friends, they're not going to really care. But of course, if you have someone outside, then it can be viewed, then you're kind of being revealed as to who you are, in a manner of speaking.
Well, if you've got a work environment and there are nude or semi-nude pinups all over the walls, if it's all heteronormative cis men, then yeah, you're probably okay with that. No one's going to complain. But as soon as you get someone in there who, is not one of those people, that might be just a passively sexually harassing environment.
Yep. And going back to your point earlier regarding like HR, this is when HR usually comes in and we hear all manner of these stories about the people who are reporting the issues get in trouble because, again, they're stirring the pot. They're making waves. And it's much easier to get to keep this culture stable.
HR is not on the side of the employee. HR is on the side of the company.
Yep.
They're hired by the company to protect the company.
Yep, exactly. Now,
that's why you get all these people who are reporting things to HR and it never goes anywhere.
Yep. Because it's better to keep the culture stable than it is to rock the boat there.
And someone who's complaining is a troublemaker.
Exactly. Or if they're outside the tribe.
If they're complaining, they're probably outside the tribe.
Of course. Now,
let's put them completely outside the tribe and get someone else who won't complain.
Now, taking this back to some of the issues we've seen or heard about over this year, one thing that I want to ask you about, I'm not sure if this would be, a little bit off topic or maybe right on topic, would be the recent arguments regarding Battlefield 5. It seems like every time I have you on, Ramin, we have some kind of EA-related discussion. We talked about Star Wars Battlefront last time. But
I keep mentioning that my play demographic is much more female than male. I don't really play. Not to say there aren't a lot of women who play shooters, but I don't play shooters. So if you start asking me questions about the environment or the culture in a shooter environment, I tend to assume it tends to skew strongly male, and I'm not involved in that culture, so I may not have the answer to your question.
All right. Well, this is less about the gameplay and kind of what's been happening with regards to the perception of Battlefield 5. Now, I'm not sure if you... I'm assuming you probably didn't watch the trailer that they put out for Battlefield 5 during E3.
No.
Okay. Well, in the trailer, they feature predominantly a female British soldier with a prosthetic arm, and she was kind of the forefront of the trailer. and it's completely bombastic, over the top, Michael Bay-esque. I think that's the best discussion there. And a lot of people were arguing about this being EA again trying to quote unquote force diversity. It was historically inaccurate to feature a woman so predominantly in a battlefield, stuff like that. And there were similar discussions about this during the previous Battlefield game when they wanted to include female soldiers during, like, just as a general character in that game. And a lot of people again try to cite historical accuracy or being respectful of the period as a kind of a defense against this kind of inclusivity. So I guess I guess keeping with this topic, and like I said, I'm not sure this will be something that you're too particularly versed in, but what are your thoughts when we hear about like historical accuracy or again these kinds of discussions when it comes to representing minorities or women in video games?
I would imagine a large studio like EA knows that if they can get more women playing their games, they'll make a lot more money.
Yep.
And the more women you have in a game, the more men you're going to bring into the game. So I mean, just like the same thing. You go to a nightclub, you have ladies' nights where women get free and men have to pay, because the more women you bring in, the more men you bring in. So that just makes complete sense. The problem is when you have a marketing team decides to put lipstick on a pig by saying, oh, well, let's try to make a trailer that makes our game look gender neutral. Well, it doesn't matter how you dress it up. If you have a game where the whole objective is for people to run around and shoot each other in the head, you're not really designing that to be not only it's not a gender neutral game, it's also not a generationally neutral game, because you're going to be attracting a much younger demographic with that type of action than you are going to be attracting an older demographic. I would be tempted to say that you're trying to attract a demographic that's much younger than your MSRP. Am I saying that right? The rating for your game may be 18 plus, but your game content is skewed towards people who are clearly children, and a lot of them will be playing your game. So if you want to have a diverse consumer base using your game, you should make a game that appeals to diverse consumer interests. Example, the game I'm developing now in Canada, where it's a combat game, but has militaristic elements, and but instead of being 100% combat, our game got 40% combat and 60% nurture, because anything you do in battle can cause physical, emotional, mental injuries or trauma, and half that game is going into the metagame with your team and trying to repair your people and your units to get them ready for the next fight. And that's something it just doesn't exist in the games now. You're just magically healed as soon as you're wiped out, and you go right back into it. So it's just 100% combat, but that's not how real life is. In real life, it's 90% of your army is support units. Only 10% actually does any fighting. It's probably even bigger percent if you're getting into like air forces and things like that, because that's you need that. Otherwise, your whole army will just grind to a halt. It doesn't matter how many reinforcements you're getting. And in real life, that's even though we focus so much on how much we're going to spend on weapons and almost nothing on what do we spend to treat our veterans when they come back, which causes all kinds of problems. That's not how you create a sustainable fighting force. That's not how you boost recruitment either. And so you got the same type of thing here. If you want to include people of varying genders and backgrounds, you create a game that accommodates a variety of gameplay elements in it, not just how well can I shoot somebody's head.
Yep. And that was actually going to take me to my next point, because another thing that we hear is that the simple solution is just, instead of having a straight 18 to 31 male be the protagonist, just replace that with a woman, or with an African American, or with any minority that you can think of, and the game will magically be better. But as you said, Ramin, that's not the case. If you're still just running around shooting, killing, and all that, you're just just doing window dressing. You're not really changing the actual experience.
If the avatar has breasts but still runs around and shoots things, it's acting just like everyone else in the tribe and is part of the tribe. But as soon as you have someone in there that says, okay, wait, I don't want to kill anybody, I'd rather be helping people, that person's not part of that tribe at all. But if you could make that person part of the tribe, like we're doing in Destiny Sword in Canada, now all of a sudden there's room for people like that who don't want to fight, who want to help people, who want to heal people. That's an invaluable skill in the game we're developing. So I would imagine we're going to have a very strong cross-gender and cross-generational appeal in that game. We may not have that'll attract the same type of groups that maybe the biggest companies will get, but we'll get a nice mix. And that nice mix means you're much likely to have a longer tail in your game where people are going to be playing for much longer periods of time because they're playing long enough to develop social interaction and social connection with other people, and that's what keeps people in games, not the content.
Yep. Now, talking about trying to change things and make things more inclusive, there's another criticism, and this is another popular one that I hear a lot, and that we see from a lot of people who make attack videos and articles and stuff like that, and that is the quote-unquote the women are trying to ruin games, or ruin comics, or insert any pop culture medium here that you can think of. And it's the idea that if we let more women in, or more minorities, or whatever, that we're not going to have that same experience anymore. And you can see this especially when it comes to the comic book industry. There are dozens upon dozens of YouTube channels and people discussing about how, inclusivity is ruining Marvel, and, these comics, they're trying to get rid of what makes comics great and all that kind of thing. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts when you hear stuff like that?
When I hear people making those sorts of complaints, I'm thinking, those people are just so many generations out of touch. Even the people who I hear saying, "Wow, Black Panther movie was so inclusive," blah blah blah. I'm thinking they're already a generation behind also, because I looked at Black Panther and I thought that was a train wreck as far as inclusivity. You've got a scenario where the movie revolves around two black men who fight each other to the death, which was the canon from the Black Panther series going back to 1973, which was just ripped from the real life events that happened in 1968. You had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King fighting it out, which was orchestrated completely by the CIA. Both men were tapped the whole time. There's been movies about this. It's public record now. There were so many things they could have taken from Black Panther canon, but they took the absolute most anti-black part that they could, and that was written at a time when Marvel readership was like 96% white. So obviously they were going to make a story that was palpable to whites. So you did have a story where black people were killing white people. You had a story where black people were killing black people. That went along perfectly fine with the audience they had then. It works perfectly fine with the audience they have now, unfortunately. And that's there's actually a period during the Black Panther comic book series when Black Panther was a woman. I would have, now if I had seen that, I would have been like, okay, Disney is being inclusive. That didn't happen. In fact, when the guy who played Black Panther ended up falling in battle, there were any number of much more competent women that could have defeated him and his adversary, that just stood by and just let their entire country and culture disintegrate because the idea of a woman be leading their country just didn't occur to them, or to Disney, or to the writers, or vast majority of the audience. These look like huge steps to white people, white heteronormative people, but these are still really baby steps.
Yeah, and that probably is a discussion, that may be a discussion too big for this cast to get more about that, but yeah, it's that...
Ain't too radical.
Yeah. But man, it's definitely like as you said, like that perception about what brings about change is different depending upon what part of the group you are. Like for instance, there's a discussion about the recent movie that Crazy Rich Asians that is being celebrated for having an entirely Asian cast. And again, it's being viewed differently whether you're white and watching that movie, or if you are of Asian descent and watching that movie.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm definitely going to see that.
Yeah. And in chat, it's very, and actually this brings up a really interesting point, going back to what we were saying regarding trying to do that window dressing. One of the big things Marvel, and kind of what started a lot of these people attacking Marvel and making these channels, was the idea of essentially gender flipping a lot of their key characters. They had a black woman take the role of Iron Man. They had a female Thor, and I'm sure there's, for the Marvel fans,
who did this?
Marvel did during the comic books.
Okay.
And a lot of people were arguing that they're just, again, trying to appeal to diversity instead of trying to make an original story. And I'm not sure, like, what are your thoughts about, like, when we see this kind of action take place? Is this a step in the right direction, or, again, is it just moving things around?
Well, I thought there was a relatively diverse cast in Deadpool 2.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an awesome movie.
Yeah.
And there you had what was her name? Was it Destiny, or what was the name
Domino?
of the character that it was luck based?
I think
luck based character.
Domino? I don't know. I'm not. Unfortunately, this goes back to that discussion earlier. I'm not. I don't have that background. I'm sure somebody in chat will let us know.
She was an incredible character, and she was one that everyone just automatically discounted in the movie, just like they were in the audience. Mm-hmm. And then she being the most badass character in the movie. I thought that was just amazing.
Yeah. So, like, again, like, it's always tricky when you have these discussions for greater inclusivity and diversity, because as you like, it's just very hard, or it's very hard to get that perception right. Because as we've said before, like, you'll see from a lot of white people that the second you add in a minority or a woman to a role or into a movie or anything, that they view it as, oh, we've succeeded, mission accomplished. That whole idea that, racism is over now.
Well, pretending racism doesn't exist isn't going to work. One of the things I really liked about the character is that she's constantly being subjected to racist or sexist comments, and she's just rolling her eyes like, oh my god, you didn't just say that. And then she goes and takes out the villain herself. But I mean, it's almost like they're lampooning their own racism in the movie, and I thought that was a much more effective approach than just trying to pretend it doesn't exist, because it exists. It exists all over, and pretending it doesn't exist doesn't allow us to talk about it.
Yep. And speaking about talking about these issues and not downplaying them, this was brought up earlier in chat, I think, as a joke, but it does represent a very interesting point and kind of ties us back to the whole Gamergate issue, and that was, of course, Nia Sarkeesian with Feminist Frequency and her videos and trying to bring light to these topics. And that has certainly sparked a lot of discussions, both positively and very, very negatively. And that's to say the least there. And
not familiar with it, but I can imagine. Go ahead and say.
But I don't know, have you watched or looked at any of the work that she put out?
No, but you sent me a link. I will definitely check her out.
Okay. I'll send it to you on Skype when we're done here. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, like, her kind of style and critiquing. But if you haven't seen it yet, it doesn't make sense to bring it up here, because there's definitely a lot to go over there.
All right.
But let me do a quick time check. We're just under an hour into the stream. And for anyone watching us live right now, if you have any questions for us, about diversity or inclusivity when it comes to the game industry. Please get them in now, because we'll probably wrap things up unless anything big happens in the next, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes, if that works for you, Ramin.
That's fine.
Okay. And for myself, I'm trying to think. I think I had one other point that I wanted to bring up, but I think we've kind of covered a lot already. We talked about Battlefield. We talked about Gamergate. I know I was talking a little bit about the whole Arena.net firing, but I don't know if that would be do you feel that would be completely related to our topic at hand?
You mean the one where the woman told off one of the people, one of the gamers on the forum, and then the backlash resulted in her being fired?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think she treated the person appropriately. I think that she was being sexist, but I think you're seeing that a lot these days. It's going both ways. Like the incel movement is just taking sexism to its most illogical extreme. But I've also seen female vigilante groups rise up in response to the incel movement, especially in Toronto, where there seems to be a real hotspot, where they're actually going online and hunting down guys that they think might be an incel, and they're getting a lot of false positives. I know this from firsthand because I got attacked by several of them who were using the exact same language, the exact same methodology. It's like they've been training to do this, and this is anytime you get people lining up as, this is my team, you're on the enemy team, you're going to get that oxytocin flowing, you're going to get aggression, and it doesn't matter what the gender is, it doesn't matter what the racial group is, it's all about, even the people that are annoying to you, you should still treat them like family and include them. I have annoying people in my family. Most people have annoying people in their family. That's okay. It's okay for people to be annoying and still work with them and still include them. You find out what they like and you don't like, and you don't go out of your way to piss them off. But you give them permission to breathe in your space. You give them permission to have a heartbeat, to exist. You don't call the cops on them because they did this while having the wrong skin color, or because they had breasts and you didn't want anybody with breasts to be in your area, so you call the cops on them or harass them or whatever you do. Everyone, going back 300,000 years ago, everyone we knew was part of your tribe. Everyone was your friend. We're not wired for this mass of people coming from all over, and because we're vulnerable to these types of suggestions, so many groups, so many industries are just organized around manipulating people because of this physiological weakness. Even though many of these people, like say in marketing, don't know the physiology, they know what works, and they hammer it. And they're just to sell a product or to get you to cough up money or whatever it is. And the solution. And here I'm especially looking at HR people in our industry, is education. And that's just not something we're big on in America anymore. We used to be an educational powerhouse. Now we're not. We're just a misinformation powerhouse. We've become the laughing stock because now everybody just makes bot farms and just to influence our elections and on Facebook or whatever, and we just fall for it. Whatever we see, we believe because we don't have the education to resist dumb suggestions.
And again, like as you said, like we hear all about these like various groups being formed. The groups that are against women, the women groups are against men and stuff like that. And as you said, and I think ultimately this could be our big point for the cast, that for things to improve, we need to have more of that group or tribe culture be more open. Because if it's just either us versus them or them versus us, it doesn't really matter who wins in the end. The wheel just keeps turning the same exact way. It's just, a different face in charge.
Yeah, I go to yoga studio and they're all saying namaste and all being loving, and I noticed that every single one of them is white. I'm like, okay, would they be the same if half the people here weren't white?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter what you say; it matters what you do, and
Yep.
it matters how you treat people, and it matters that you treat everybody well, not just the people who look like you.
Now, I guess to begin to wrap things up, one thing that we didn't touch on that I think we can maybe spend like a minute or two on has to definitely be the growing diversity in the independent space. This has definitely been one of the more fascinating aspects. And I was wondering for you, have you had a chance or have done like any looking into games from the independent space that have gone further in terms of inclusivity or diversity?
Well, you got to realize that increasingly, studios, even in AAA studios, the games you're playing are made on multiple continents. A lot of the content is farmed out to third-party studios and other places where things are being made, and there's this necessity to be able to interact across cultures is becoming increasingly important. So you're going to see this, and in the indie space, they can take more risks and do things that maybe they can't do in AAA because those people would not pass the cultural test in AAA and would not be hired, no matter how talented they are, because they don't look like the people that have already been hired there.
All right. So I think I am just about out of questions. Again, we could probably segue into free-to-play design, but that's another 2 to 3 hours, and by then it will be completely dark behind you. Like, fortunately, we kept the sun up. We did a podcast a few months ago where it literally went from light to pitch black out over the course of our entire 2-hour conversation. But it has always been a pleasure talking to Rami, and like I said, I'm sure we'll be having more discussions in the future.
And I appreciate you having an open forum for difficult topics like this one.
Yeah, no problem. And for anyone watching this, either live or recorded, I think we just got a weird question there, but or weird comment. But if there are anyone interested in coming on to talk again about whatever when it comes to game design in the industry, please get in touch with me, whether you are male, female, or LGBT, however you identify. I always want to talk to people about the game industry. But to wrap things up, Ramin, do you have any final thoughts or anything for us to go out on for tonight?
No, I think I said my piece. I probably said too much as it is.
All right. Well, I think with that, and again, when it comes to this topic, we are certainly two guys sitting here for an hour aren't going to be solving the diversity issue when it comes to the game industry anytime soon. So we will wrap things up for this evening. Fortunately, the comments have remained relatively calm. I'm sure that may change when this goes up in recorded form.
Better luck next time.
Yeah, we'll see how things go. But we will say goodnight here. So for anyone who's been watching us either live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. I guess before we go, Ramin, you mentioned the name of the game that you're currently working on, but just to elaborate or clarify, what was it again if anyone wants to follow that in the future?
Destiny's Sword, being made by Two Dogs in Canada, Toronto, Greater Toronto area in Canada.
Okay. Are there any updates regarding when it will be available?
We're gonna need at least another year, but things are looking really good. The design has been coming along really well. I've been really impressed with the whole team.
Great. I'm looking forward to that. But with that said, we'll wrap things up here. I'm sorry, Ice, you came just at the end, but for anyone who missed our cast, if you would like, it will go up in recorded form in a few weeks with our VIP Patreon supporters getting early and ad-free access to it. But that is going to do it. So again, Ramin, it was a pleasure hanging out with you, and we'll talk again more in the future.
Thank you, Josh. I look forward to it.
All right. So if you mind hanging on Skype for like 1 minute when we say goodbye, but otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. I'll be back later for our game stream. But until then, have a great afternoon.